The massive alien ship dropped out of hyperspace like a dark metal mountain, its hull gleaming against the star field. Commander Velthak stretched his forearms and clicked his claws against the control panel, already bored by what he saw on the scanner screens. "Another primitive world," he muttered to his science officer. "Look at these readings, Kulmar. They still burn chemicals to fly around their little planet." Science Officer Kulmar's insect-like head tilted as she studied the data flowing across her screens. Her mandibles clicked together in what passed for laughter among her species. "Commander, their most powerful weapons are simple fusion bombs. My hatchlings could build better toys. Their computers are so basic they still use electricity flowing through metal wires." Velthak leaned back in his command chair, already thinking about his next assignment. This would be another easy conquest for the Zephyrian hegemony. In 3,000 years of expansion, they had never met a species that could challenge their superior technology and military might. These humans would join the long list of defeated races serving the Empire. Far below on Earth's surface, Dr. Jinho Park sat alone in his small observatory outside Seoul. He had been tracking the strange objects in space for 3 days, hoping they were just asteroids or comets. But as his telescope focused on the massive ship hovering above Earth's atmosphere, his worst fears came true. His hands shook as he reached for the red emergency phone that connected directly to the Korean Defense Ministry. The receiver felt heavy in his trembling fingers. "This is Dr. Park at Seoul Observatory," he whispered into the phone. "We are not alone. They are here." Within 1 hour, every government on Earth received the same terrifying message. Emergency. Meetings began in Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and London. Military leaders who had spent their careers preparing for wars between nations now faced an enemy from the stars. Admiral Vexran studied the tactical reports from his flagship, a vessel so large it could hold entire human cities within its hull. His 3 eyes glowed with satisfaction as his subordinates presented their invasion plan. "Standard protocol, Admiral," reported his tactical officer. 200 ships will be more than enough. We disable their primitive military installations first, then capture their major population centers. The survivors will be processed for labor assignments in our mining colonies." Vexran nodded his approval. Every conquest followed the same pattern. First came shock and terror, then desperate resistance that quickly crumbled when faced with superior firepower. Within days, the defeated species would accept their new role serving the hegemony. He expected this campaign to be finished in 3 days at most. The alien invasion fleet descended through Earth's atmosphere like a dark storm cloud. Each ship was larger than anything humans had ever built, their hulls crackling with energy weapons that could level mountains. In military bases around the world, pilots ran to their aircraft, knowing they faced impossible odds. Major Kim Soo-jin strapped herself into her F-22 fighter jet, her face grim but determined. She had trained for aerial combat her entire career, but never against enemies who could travel between stars. "Dragon Squadron, this is Dragon Leader," she spoke into her radio. "Our missiles probably won't even scratch their shields, but we have to try. For our families, for our world." Her squadron lifted off from Osan Air Base as alien ships began their attack on Seoul. The human jets looked like tiny insects compared to the massive alien vessels, their primitive weapons useless against energy shields that could deflect nuclear weapons. As the first alien craft appeared over Seoul's skyline, something unexpected happened in the minds of every human who saw them. Scientists had studied human psychology for decades, but they had never encountered a situation like this. When faced with an enemy that threatened not just their nations but their entire species, something deep and ancient awakened in human consciousness. It was not fear, though fear was there. It was not anger, though anger burned hot in their hearts. It was something the Zephyrian hegemony xenobiologists had failed to detect in all their scans and studies of human civilization. Commander Velthak watched the first human fighters approach his ships, expecting them to retreat when they realized how outmatched they were. Instead, he saw something that puzzled him. The human pilots were not flying away. They were accelerating directly toward his vessels, their primitive weapons firing uselessly, but their intent unmistakable. "Curious," he murmured to Kulmar. "Their tactical computers must be malfunctioning. They are not following logical retreat protocols." What Velthak did not understand was that humans had never developed logical retreat protocols when their species faced extinction. Evolution had programmed something different into their minds, something that would soon turn the hegemony's easy conquest into their greatest nightmare. The battle for Earth was about to begin, and neither side truly understood what they were fighting. The first rays of sunlight painted Seoul's skyline gold as Major Kim Soo-jin strapped herself into her fighter jet. Her hands moved through the pre-flight checklist automatically, but her mind kept returning to the impossible sight above, the city. Alien ships hung in the sky like dark metal clouds, their hulls crackling with energy that made the air itself smell of lightning. "Dragon Squadron, this is Dragon Leader." She spoke into her radio, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Remember our training. Stay together. Watch each other's backs." The responses came back from her pilots, each voice trying to sound brave. They all knew this was likely their last mission. The alien ships were massive. Their weapons could destroy entire city blocks, and their shields had already proven that human missiles were useless. Kim Soo-jin pushed her throttle forward and lifted off from the runway. Behind her, 11 other jets followed, their engines screaming as they climbed toward an enemy they could not hope to defeat. The hegemony forces moved with cold efficiency across Seoul. Commander Velthak watched from his command ship as his ground troops herded humans into collection areas. Everything was proceeding according to standard invasion protocol. The primitive weapons of the humans had caused no damage to his ships, just as predicted. "Sir," his communications officer called out, "the humans are launching another attack wave." Velthak barely looked up from his tactical display. "Eliminate them quickly. We have a schedule to maintain." Major Kim Soo-jin dove her fighter toward the nearest alien vessel, her targeting system locked onto what looked like a weapon array. She fired her missiles knowing they would do nothing, but hoping against hope that something might get through. The missiles exploded harmlessly against the alien energy shield, creating brief flowers of light that faded immediately. Around her, the other jets in her squadron were having the same result. Their most advanced weapons were like stones thrown against a mountain. Then she saw it happen. A hegemony plasma cannon swiveled toward the ground and fired a bolt of pure energy. The beam struck Seoul National University Hospital, and the entire building disappeared in a flash of white light. The hospital had been marked with red crosses. It was clearly a medical facility. Inside were hundreds of patients, doctors, nurses, and children recovering from surgeries and illnesses. In 1 second, they were all gone. The silence on the radio lasted only a moment before it exploded with voices. Human voices filled with something that Velthak's translators could not properly interpret. It was not fear. It was not despair. It was something else entirely. "They killed the children," whispered Lieutenant Park Dong-woo over the radio. "They killed the children in the hospital." Major Kim Soo-jin felt something break inside her chest. Not her heart, but something deeper. Something that had kept her following rules and tactics and reasonable military doctrine. She looked at the alien ship that had fired on the hospital, then at her fuel gauge and missile count. "Dragon Squadron," she said quietly. "This is Dragon Leader. New orders." She turned her fighter directly toward the alien vessel and pushed her throttle to maximum. Her jet screamed through the air as she aimed for what looked like the ship's bridge. "Dragon Leader, what are you doing?" called out her wingman. "What I should have done from the beginning," she replied. Her fighter slammed into the alien ship's energy shield and exploded in a ball of fire. The shield flickered for just a moment but held. However, something else happened that Commander Velthak had never seen before in 3 decades of conquest. The other human fighters followed her. One by one, 11 more jets dove into alien vessels, their pilots choosing death over surrender. The shields held against each impact, but Velthak watched his tactical displays with growing confusion. "Sir," his sensor officer reported, "we're detecting unusual behavior patterns across the entire city. Human ground forces are abandoning defensive positions and launching direct attacks on our troops." Velthak switched his view screen to ground-level cameras. What he saw made no sense according to every military textbook in the hegemony database. Human soldiers were charging directly at his war machines, firing their primitive weapons even, when they knew they would die. Civilians were throwing rocks and bottles at his armored vehicles. Old men and women were dragging wounded fighters to safety under enemy fire. "They're acting irrationally," he reported to Admiral Vexran. "According to our behavioral models, they should be surrendering or fleeing. Instead, they continue fighting even when faced with certain death." Down in the ruined streets of Seoul, Dr. Lee Min-ho crawled through the rubble of his research laboratory. A piece of alien metal had torn through his leg, but he ignored the pain as he watched human soldiers around him. They were using their own bodies as shields to protect wounded civilians. They were sharing their last ammunition with strangers. They were singing together as they died. In a makeshift medical station set up in a subway tunnel, Nurse Han So-young worked frantically to save the wounded. Her supplies were almost gone, her hands were covered in blood, and alien forces were getting closer every minute. But when she looked into the eyes of the people she was treating, she saw something that frightened her more than the aliens above. She saw rage, pure, cold, calculating rage that was growing stronger with every minute the battle continued. The hegemony won the battle for Seoul within 12 hours. Their victory reports noted minimal equipment losses and successful completion of objectives. But they also contained an unusual notation that would later change galactic history. Species exhibits anomalous resistance behavior. Recommend extended observation period. Commander Velthak had conquered 47 worlds in his career. He had never seen anything like what the humans had shown him that day. 6 months after the aliens had conquered Earth, Commander Velthak stared at the reports flooding his desk with growing alarm. What had started as routine occupation was turning into something he had never experienced in 30 years of military service. "Sir," his intelligence officer reported, "we've lost another power station. The human work crew somehow overloaded the fusion reactor core. Our engineers said it was impossible with their primitive knowledge." Velthak rubbed his 3 eyes tiredly. This was the 5th impossible sabotage incident this week. The humans were supposed to be working in the factories and mines, grateful for food and shelter. Instead, they were finding ways to destroy equipment that should have been beyond their understanding. "And the resistance cells?" he asked. "Growing faster than we can eliminate them, sir. We destroy one group and 3 more appear. They seem to be learning from each attack we make." Deep beneath the bombed ruins of Busan, Dr. Kim Jae-sung worked by the light of salvaged alien equipment. His underground laboratory was hidden in what used to be a subway tunnel, protected by tons of concrete and steel. Around him, other human scientists and engineers studied pieces of hegemony technology with intense focus. "Pass me that energy. Coupling," Dr. Kim called to his assistant. His hands were steady as he connected alien components in ways their original designers had never intended. 6 months ago, he had been a university professor teaching basic electronics. Now he was building weapons that could punch holes through alien armor. Researcher Park Yu-jin looked up from her computer screen, her face pale with excitement. "Dr. Kim, you need to see this brain scan data. I think I know why we can do things the aliens think are impossible." She pulled up 2 neural pathway diagrams on her screen. One showed the organized, logical thought patterns of a captured alien prisoner. The other showed a human brain in action. The difference was startling. "Look at how their minds work," Park Yu-jin whispered, pointing at the alien scan. "Every thought follows a clear path from problem to solution. Very efficient, very logical, very predictable. Now look at ours." The human brain scan looked like a lightning storm. Thoughts jumped randomly between different areas, made connections that seemed to have no logical pattern, and created solutions that appeared to come from nowhere. "They evolved for specialized intelligence," she continued. "Each of their species developed specific mental abilities perfect for their environment. They're incredibly smart, but only in narrow ways. We evolved for chaos. Our brains can make connections they can't even imagine." Dr. Kim stared at the scans, understanding flooding through him. "That's why we can figure out their technology so quickly. We don't think about it the same way they do. We see possibilities they can't see. Above ground, Resistance leader Choi Hyun-woo crouched in the ruins of what used to be Seoul's business district. He was planning an attack on an alien supply convoy, but not in any way the enemy would expect. His fighters had learned that direct assault was suicide. Instead, they had developed tactics that seemed to come from nowhere. "Position the mirrors here and here," he whispered to his team, pointing at 2 building rooftops. "When their energy weapons fire at us, the beams will bounce back at their own ships." His lieutenant looked confused. "Mirrors against space weapons? Trust me," Choi Hyun-woo smiled. "I got the idea from watching my daughter play with a flashlight and her mother's compact mirror. Sometimes the simplest solutions work best." The attack worked perfectly. The alien convoy fired their plasma cannons at the human fighters, only to have their own weapons reflected back at them. 3 alien vehicles were destroyed by their own firepower, while the humans escaped without a single casualty. Word of the mirror tactic spread through hidden communication networks that the aliens couldn't trace. In Tokyo, a former video game programmer named Yokohama Jin used the same principle to hack alien computer systems. He discovered that alien security was designed to stop logical attacks but couldn't handle the random, chaotic approach of human hackers. "Their firewalls are like locked doors," he explained to other resistance members over encrypted radio. "They're expecting someone to pick the lock or find the key, but we're not trying to open the door, we're walking through the walls they didn't know existed." In London, former engineering student David Kim Williams taught resistance cells how to build electromagnetic pulse devices using nothing but household electronics. Microwave ovens, television parts, and car batteries became weapons that could shut down alien equipment. The word spread from city to city, country to country. Humans were learning to fight in ways that made no sense to their occupiers. They turned children's toys into communication devices, used cooking ingredients to make explosives, and modified construction equipment into mobile weapon platforms. Commander Velthak received reports from across the planet that all told the same impossible story. The humans were not just resisting, they were evolving. Every tactic the hegemony used against them was quickly countered with something unexpected. Every piece of technology they captured was reverse-engineered and improved upon within weeks. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "Admiral Vexaran is requesting a status report. He wants to know when we can declare the occupation complete." Velthak looked at the growing pile of incident reports on his desk. For the first time in his military career, he had no answer to give his superior. The hegemony had won every battle, but somehow the humans were winning the war. What had started as a simple conquest was becoming something unprecedented in galactic history, a learning war, where the conquered were evolving faster than their conquerors. Admiral Vexaran stood before the holographic display in his flagship's command center, watching red warning lights blink across dozens of star systems. What should have been a simple 3-day conquest of one primitive world had become a galactic nightmare that threatened the very foundation of the hegemony. "Report," he commanded, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "His Intelligence," Chief stepped forward, mandibles clicking nervously. "Sir, we have confirmed uprisings on 17 worlds. The humans are somehow spreading their fighting methods to other species across our territory." Captain Song Min-seok had once flown passenger aircraft between Seoul and Tokyo, carrying businessmen and tourists on routine flights. Now he stood on the bridge of a captured hegemony cruiser, watching his mixed crew of humans and liberated aliens prepare for their next strike against their former captors. The ship barely resembled its original design. Human engineers had welded additional armor plating over vital systems, rerouted power conduits in chaotic patterns that confused alien repair crews, and installed weapons that fired in unpredictable sequences. The bridge itself had been redesigned with human psychology in mind, encouraging creative thinking over rigid military protocol. "Target acquired, Captain," reported his weapons officer, a former taxi driver from Busan who had learned to operate alien plasma cannons by treating them like oversized video games. "Remember," Song Min-seok said quietly, "we're not trying to destroy their ship. We want to capture it intact so we can convert more of their people to our cause. The attack came from 3 directions at once, using modified cargo drones that the hegemony sensors couldn't distinguish from space debris. By the time the alien cruiser realized it was under attack, human boarding parties were already cutting through its hull. Commander Velthak received the casualty report with disbelieving eyes. Another 3 ships lost, this time to weapons that seemed to appear from nowhere and disappear just as quickly. His tactical computers couldn't predict human behavior because humans didn't follow any logical patterns. "Sir?" His communications officer called out, "We're receiving a transmission from the captured vessel." "Put it through," Velthak ordered. The face that appeared on his screen belonged to one of his own officers, but something in the alien's eyes had changed. "Commander Velthak, this is Lieutenant Zulmak of the cruiser Dominance. I wish to inform you that I am defecting to the human resistance." Velthak stared in shock. "You're suffering from some kind of mental damage, Lieutenant. Human prisoners often use psychological manipulation techniques." "No, sir," Zulmak replied calmly. "I've learned something the hegemony never taught us. There's a difference between existing and living. The humans showed me what it means to hope." On the distant world of Kepler 442b, resistance leader Zul Thara crouched in the ruins of what had once been her species' greatest city. 6 months ago, she had been a factory supervisor, content with her quiet life under hegemony rule. Then the humans had arrived. Dr. Yoon Hye-jin, an escaped human prisoner, knelt beside her examining a map of hegemony supply routes. The small, Korean woman looked fragile, but Zulthara had learned not to underestimate human appearance. "The convoy will pass through this canyon every 3 days," Dr. Yoon explained, her voice calm despite the danger they faced. "But we're not going to attack the convoy directly." "Then how do we stop their supplies?" Zulthara asked. Dr. Yoon smiled, an expression that had become familiar to resistance fighters across the galaxy. "We're going to make them attack themselves. I'll show you how to hack their automated defense systems." Within 2 weeks, hegemony supply convoys across the sector were being destroyed by their own security drones. The aliens couldn't understand how their most secure systems were being turned against them by species they considered primitive. The psychological impact was devastating hegemony forces throughout the galaxy. Intelligence officer Nam Ji-woo, working deep undercover in a hegemony command center, watched alien officers struggle with concepts they had never encountered before. "They're exhibiting signs of despair," she reported in an encrypted transmission to human command. "Their entire worldview is based on logical superiority. When that fails, they don't know how to respond." Nam Ji-woo had volunteered for the most dangerous assignment in the human resistance. Using stolen alien identity documents, she had infiltrated the enemy's most secure facilities. Her job was to feed critical information to human forces, while appearing to be a loyal alien citizen. "The next major offensive is planned for the Centauri system," she whispered into her hidden transmitter. "They're moving their reserve fleet there, leaving the supply depot at Rigel undefended." Her information allowed human forces to stay 1 step ahead of every hegemony strategy. The hunters were becoming the hunted, and the aliens were beginning to realize they were fighting an enemy unlike anything in their experience. Admiral Vexaran found himself facing a choice that no hegemony commander had ever confronted. The Council was demanding results, but every conventional military option had failed. The humans and their alien allies were growing stronger with each passing day, spreading their resistance methods like a virus of hope across the galaxy. "Sir," his aide reported quietly, "the Council is convening emergency sessions. There are rumors that some members are suggesting extreme measures." Vexran understood. Genocide. The complete extermination of the human species and any aliens who had been contaminated by their ideas. It was a solution that would work, but it would also destroy everything the hegemony claimed to represent. As reports continued to flood in from across hegemony space, one fact became increasingly clear. The humans had done something unprecedented in galactic history. They had weaponized hope itself, turning it into a force that could topple empires. The massive fleet approached Zephyr Prime like a storm front across the stars. Admiral Vexran watched from his command center as hundreds of ships dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the hegemony's most heavily defended system. 2 years ago, he would have laughed at such a small force challenging the Empire's capital, world. Now the sight filled him with dread. These were not the primitive human vessels that had first appeared over Earth. The ships in this fleet were a mixture of captured hegemony cruisers, modified alien vessels, and entirely new designs that seemed to follow no known engineering principles. Their hulls were covered in chaotic patterns of armor and weapons that hurt to look at, as if the ships themselves had been designed by minds that thought in ways no hegemony engineer could understand. Fleet Admiral Lee Dong-hyun stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching Zephyr Prime grow larger on the main screen. 2 years ago, he had been a South Korean naval officer, commanding a destroyer in Earth's Pacific Fleet. Now he led a coalition of species that spanned half the galaxy, united by something the hegemony had never encountered: hope. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we're receiving a transmission from the Hegemony Council. They want to talk." Lee Dong-hyun nodded slowly. Around him, the bridge crew worked with quiet efficiency. Humans stood alongside aliens from dozens of different worlds, all of them united by the experiences they had shared fighting against impossible odds. "Put them through," he ordered. Admiral Vexran stood before the Hegemony Council in their great chamber, feeling smaller than he had ever felt in his long military career. The 12 council members sat in their traditional circle, their alien faces showing various expressions of anger, fear, and confusion. "Report, Admiral," commanded Council Leader Thexvar, her voice sharp with barely controlled rage. "How did a primitive species manage to approach our capital world?" Vexran straightened his shoulders, knowing his career was over regardless of what he said next. "Council Leader, the humans are not requesting our surrender. They are offering to negotiate." The silence in the chamber was deafening. In 3,000 years of hegemony expansion, no conquered species had ever been in a position to offer negotiations. The very concept was impossible according to everything they understood about galactic civilization. "Negotiate?" Council Leader Thexvar's voice rose to a screech. "They are primitives. Category 7 minimal threats." "No," Vexran replied quietly. "They are not." Dr. Shin Yoon-young had spent her early career as a diplomatic translator for the Korean Foreign Ministry. She had never expected to become the chief negotiator for an interstellar coalition, but the war had changed everyone's expectations about what was possible. She sat across from the hegemony representatives in a neutral space station that had been hastily converted into a meeting place. The aliens looked uncomfortable, their usual confidence shaken by 2 years of defeats they couldn't understand. "Our terms are simple," she said, sliding a data pad across the table. "Recognition of the Terran Coalition as an independent galactic power, immediate withdrawal from all occupied human worlds, reparations for damages caused during the invasion, and a formal apology." The lead hegemony negotiator, a tall alien with 4 arms and eyes like black stones, stared at the document as if it might explode. "These terms are impossible. The hegemony does not negotiate with conquered species." Dr. Shin smiled, the same expression that had become famous across the galaxy during 2 years of impossible victories. "Then perhaps you should look out the window and reconsider who has been conquered." Through the station's viewing ports, the combined fleet of the Terran Coalition stretched across space like a constellation of defiance. Ships from dozens of worlds flew in formation with human vessels, their crews united by something stronger than military discipline. The negotiations lasted for 3 weeks. Council Leader Thexvar wanted to fight, to commit the full strength of the hegemony military to destroying this human infection once and for all. But her advisors showed her the cost projections, the casualty estimates, the probability calculations, that all led to the same conclusion. The humans had taught too many species how to fight in ways the hegemony couldn't counter. A war now would destroy both civilizations, leaving nothing but ruins among the stars. Former literature professor Kim Tae-young sat in his small cabin aboard the Coalition flagship, carefully writing the final draft of the treaty that would change galactic history. His hands moved slowly across the datapad as he chose each word with the precision of a poet. "Strength is not measured by the sophistication of one's weapons," he wrote, but by the resilience of one's spirit. The signing ceremony took place in the same neutral station where the negotiations had been held. Representatives from both sides gathered in the main conference room, their faces showing the weight of history being made. Dr. Shin Yoon-young signed first, her signature flowing across the bottom of the document in careful Korean characters. Then came the hegemony representatives, their alien script looking strange next to the human writing. The Terran Accords were complete. Young pilot Lim Soo-min watched from her fighter cockpit as the coalition fleet prepared to depart Zephyr Prime. She had been 16 when the aliens first appeared over Seoul, just another high school student worried about exams and boys. Now she was 22, a veteran pilot who had flown missions across half the galaxy. As her squadron formed up for the journey home, she looked out at the stars and smiled. The universe had underestimated humanity once. It would never make that mistake again. The age of human expansion among the stars had begun.